Chapter 14 is on the respiratory system. So here are some major functions of the respiratory system. There's a huge surface area for gas exchange. The air is moved from the exchange surfaces in the lungs along the respiratory tract. The respiratory surfaces are protected from dehydration, temperature changes, and there's defense against pathogens. There's a function in producing sounds involved in speaking, singing, and other forms of communication, and also aiding the sense of smell. So the respiratory system is divided into the upper respiratory system and the lower respiratory system, basically above the neck. So the upper respiratory system is the nose, the nasal cavity, the sinuses, which are openings in the bone, and the pharynx. The pharynx is the term for the throat. Now, this upper respiratory system has functions of filtering, warming, and humidifying the incoming air. We are supposed to breathe in through our nose because that's where the cleaning and warming and humidifying takes place. This is due to the need for protecting the more sensitive lower respiratory tract. Heat and water are absorbed in outgoing air. And again, the structures are the nose, the nasal cavity, the sinuses, and the pharynx. In the lower respiratory tract, the body parts include the larynx, which is your voice box up here, the trachea, the bronchi, which are singular bronchus, they split and one goes into each lung, further splitting, or the bronchioles, and then finally the air sacs or alveoli. And this passageway moves air to the gas exchange surfaces, and then in the alveoli, the gases are exchanged with the capillaries. So we call those passageways that are just transporting air conducting passageways. It's from the nasal cavity to the bronchioles, and then the respiratory portion would be the smallest bronchioles and the alveoli, and that's where the gas exchange actually occurs. Specific epithelium, respiratory mucosa, lines the conducting portion of the respiratory tract. You may remember pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium is found in quite a few areas. There are mucus cells called goblet cells that produce mucus. There are cilia that are waving to bring particles up so that they can be swallowed. Underneath that ciliated pseudostratified epithelium is the lamina propria. The respiratory mucosa, again, warms the incoming air. It moistens the incoming air, and it protects it humidifies it so that the lower surfaces do not dry out. Cystic fibrosis is a disease of Caucasians that you may have heard about. You may know someone with this disease. It affects the respiratory mucosa. It's inherited, and these patients produce a very thick, sticky mucus that blocks the airflow. They get more respiratory infections and subsequent damage to their system. And now the lifespan is longer than it used to be because people are extremely active in getting to the hospital when they have a respiratory infection. Sorry about the cat. She's kind of noisy. The pharynx is subdivided into 3 regions, and so just look at the names of those: naso, nose, oro, mouth, laryngeal, larynx. The nasopharynx is between the internal nares and the soft palate. We'll look at these structures in a second. The oral pharynx is the area between the soft palate and the base of the tongue, and then the laryngeal pharynx. So you don't, you'll remember the order because the nasopharynx is behind the nose, the oropharynx behind the mouth, and the laryngeal pharynx behind the larynx, the voice box. So a term you may not have heard was this external nares, the nostrils. This, what we think of as our nose, inside is the nasal vestibule, and that's got hair to trap particles. And then the nasal cavity itself has these odd-shaped bones called conchae sticking out to increase surface area, and it causes the air we breathe in to pass over this and allowing the air to spend more time in the nasal cavity to warm up and clean up. The floor of this nasal cavity is composed of the hard, bony palate and then the soft palate, and that soft palate then ends here. Now here's a weird picture I took from another textbook. It is a cut of the face, but you can see the mouth, you can see the maxillary sinuses, you can see the frontal sinuses, and you can see these conchae. So this is the nasal cavity. And air is going to be flowing past this. It's all covered with respiratory mucosa. So air passes, in the nose, past the pharynx to the larynx. And the larynx is the beginning of the lower respiratory system. There is an opening there called a glottis, and the air passes past that glottis, and then air passes to the trachea. The trachea is also known as the windpipe. So the trachea will branch into the right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus. Now the trachea is kind of interesting. It's got a C-shaped ring of tracheal cartilage, and behind that is a muscle. So here's our cartilage, tracheal cartilage. So this is anterior. Your trachea is anterior to your esophagus, and then here is muscle that connects the C shape of the cartilage, tracheal cartilage. Every time you swallow, if there were cartilage here, the esophagus would expand and push into that cartilage, and you'd probably feel it. But the way it is with just the muscle, it allows for expansion of that esophagus as you're swallowing food. There are two primary bronchi, the right and the left, and then they are going to branch into bronchioles. So the bronchi have cartilage. Trachea has cartilage, but by the time you get to the small bronchioles, there's no cartilage anymore. There is just smooth muscle. And this is a bit of a problem. A sympathetic nervous system causes bronchodilation, so it relaxes the muscle and increases the diameter of the bronchioles to increase airflow. Parasympathetic, that is returning to normal, decreases the diameter and the airflow. So nervous stimulation can change the diameter of the bronchioles. But that's the problem, that's exactly where asthmatics have trouble. With an allergic reaction, they're going to have extreme bronchoconstriction, such as this picture here on the right, with inflammation, and it's enough, it stops the airflow enough that they can die. So they need a bronchodilator with them at all times. So the trachea branches into the bronchus. The left bronchus goes into the left lung, right into the right lung. These lungs are cone-shaped. This at the bottom, this concave inferior portion, is resting right on the diaphragm. There is a groove back on the backside here where the bronchus enters the lung. That's called the hilum. And other, blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic capillaries pass through that hilum. Each lung, you can see, is clearly divided into lobes. In the right lung, we have 3 lobes, the superior, middle, and inferior. In the left lung lobe, we have 2 lobes, superior and inferior. And these lobes are divided by fissures. So you've got a horizontal fissure here and oblique fissures. And then right here is a cardiac notch. The heart fits right into that. You may recall from an earlier chapter that we have serous membranes in the thoracic cavity. So in the pleural cavity, we have pleural membranes. The parietal pleura lines the inside of the chest wall, and the visceral pleura is right on the lungs. So as we travel further and deeper into the lungs, the bronchioles, so you can have a primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchus because there's continual dividing and they get smaller and smaller. Then you get to your final bronchioles. Now in this picture, the blue represents the tracheal cartilage, and you can see that by the time you get down to the bronchioles, there is no cartilage left. And these bronchioles are going to lead into the alveoli. These are the air sacs. Each lung has about 150 million, and you can see very good blood supply. They look like a cluster of grapes, and the blood supply surrounds the entire grape. There are elastic fibers here that allow for expansion and recoil as the air moves in and out of the lungs. So in this diagram here, you can see the pulmonary arteries are bringing the deoxygenated blood from the heart, from the right side of the heart to the lungs, and there's an exchange of gas, and the oxygenated blood will go back to the left side of the heart and finally to the systemic circuit into the whole body. This just said the pulmonary artery brings deoxygenated blood. Gas exchange occurs between the air and the alveoli. So there's air inside the alveoli, and the exchange is between the air in here and the gases inside the capillaries. Now, inside the alveoli, this picture is pretty good. It does show you each alveolus is a single layer of simple squamous cells, very thin to allow for this gas exchange to occur. It's simple squamous epithelium. But there's other kinds of cells in here as well. There is a cell called a surfactant secreting cell. A surfactant is a substance that reduces the surface tension inside the alveolus so that the alveoli do not collapse. Newborns, if they're premature, may be born without that surfactant secreting cells working yet. So they have to stay in the hospital until their lungs develop and they produce that cell. And then another type of cell would be a macrophage, roaming alveolar macrophages. They're just patrolling, looking for any bits or particles that you've accidentally inhaled and have gone into the lungs. So the movement of gases across this membrane occurs by diffusion. It's called a respiratory membrane. So let's look what that respiratory membrane actually is. First of all, you've got your alveolar cells. And then you've got your basement membrane, because all epithelium is underlain by basement membrane. But then you've got your capillary, that wall of capillary. It's also simple squamous epithelium. And all that together is called the respiratory membrane. And that's what the gases have to diffuse across.